G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward. Today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you one of my new little mini quilts. This one is a little picture window with a little kitty sitting there. If you would like to make this one along with me, simply click on the link in the description below. You'll be able to download your free PDF pattern templates and we can get started. So let's start our little mini quilt today. First up, you'll need, if you download your PDF pattern template sheet, you'll have all your sizes written there for you. You'll need your front centre panel for your mini quilt. I make that a light off-white cream. A print is fine to indicate the window frame. And then you need your 4 window panels. Now the way that I choose those colours is that we're looking to try and indicate that we're looking outside the window. So I tend to start with greens and foliage at the bottom, and then start working into a little less foliage and adding some blues, and then in that top left hand corner something that really indicates sky. That gives us that overall look of a window. So 4 of those, they all have fusible web. I have interfaced my fabrics just because I like working with a firmer fabric for these little mini quilts. Then you need your side panel strips, and I do them in a contrasting darker colour to indicate the frame up of the window. Then you need your 2 top strips, and again a nice dark colour for the top, and then just to indicate a windowsill, just something that is a mid-tone colour there will look really nice. You'll also need to make our little blind awning across the top there, just an off-white, and either you can use a piece of scalloped edge, probably cotton lace, I would suggest, or as I have here, I've just used the edge of a little scalloped serviette napkin there, and we will just be sewing those together, but any kind of lace trim will work with that one. You'll also need your little cat, best done in felt, and that one has fusible web applied also. You'll also need some wadding. Just a fine wadding I'm using here. This one is actually fusible. We will cut that to size when we're at that point. Also your backing fabric for your quilt. I've got mine ready with interfacing applied, and we will cut that to fit our assembled quilt front. You'll also need a little, well, I'm using a little button, but you could use a little charm, anything like that will work. We're just going to hang a little pull string from that blind, so it looks like our little kitty is reaching up there, and of course a little bit of perlé or some embroidery thread to attach that one will be fine. So to start with, the first thing that we're going to be doing is applying with a hot iron and a protective cloth. We're going to put our window panels in place. Now the measurement from the sides all the way around is 2.5 centimetres, so that's exactly where they'll sit, and it's a square, so you'll find they'll sit really well, and there should be 1 centimetre in between each piece. Make sure they're all nicely lined up and fuse those on. So with our little window panels all fused into place, our next step is to blanket applique the edge of each of those window panes. If you haven't sewn a blanket applique stitch before, I've just put up a new video how to sew the blanket applique stitch, and it will show you exactly how to do that. It won't just show you how to sew the stitch, it will also show you how to go around corners very effectively as well. So in this case, normally often on little mini quilts we really want these shapes to stand out, and we go for a contrasting embroidery thread. I'm actually using extra strong upholstery top stitching thread because it's one of my favourites and it's very fine. I'm also going to blend my colours this time, so I'm going to match my thread colour to my window pane, because we really want to keep those nice sharp edges nice and clean. If we go for a contrast, we will blur and lose those edges. So matching up your colours with I'll be using greens and blues just to keep that colour tone the same. So in order to save a little bit of time, I've actually got one here that I have already done that to. So you can see there the colour blending and how that's kept those shapes nice and clear and clean. Give that one a press, and then we move on to our next step, which is preparing our little awning blind. Now I've actually threaded my little button up through one of those holes with a double thread just through one of those holes and back on itself, and that's actually going to be inserted into the seam as we sew, which we will now, with right sides together. Your lace or your little scalloped edge, just sew that one along that one side, and we will be popping our little button in as we do so that when we turn that one through right side, our little button will dangle down below. I'm going to sew that one up and show you exactly what I mean. You can see that I've sewn that seam there, and I have incorporated into that seam that little button on its double thread, and I've pressed that seam open. You see where that little one is incorporated in there, and that seam is around about close to 1 centimetre. It depends on how long your lace edging is, but it doesn't really matter so long as this measurement is correct. Whatever lace edging will work with this little mini quilt. So what I'm going to do now, because I want to add that to the front of my quilt, I'm actually going to fuse just a strip of heat and bond or fusible web just across the back there, so that then I can press it on to my quilt front. So I'll just do that. So there I have added my little awning blind by fusing it into place straight over the top of that quilt front. Of course you can just pin it and stitch it on, that's fine. I just like to keep it all nice and flat. So the next step now is to sew a top stitching line just about 2 to 3 centimetres across that top of that blind, and then I would make another line just to really mark out and give an indication that that is a little blind. So we'll do that on the machine. So I hope you can see those two little top stitching lines just across there. You can see the distance apart. It just gives it that little nice finished look. Now our next step is to add our side panels, and they are just simply right sides together on both sides, and we're just going to sew that seam on the machine, and your seam allowance is 1/2 centimetre. So 1/2 centimetre both of those. I've stitched those side panels on and I've pressed those seams out nice and flat. Now we just repeat the same process with our top and bottom strips. When I give you that measurement for those top and bottom strips, I always allow you a bit of room just in case your seam allowance is a little different from mine, and you can just trim those off to fit. Once all your border panels are in place and they're all nicely pressed out flat as I have there, you can remove the backing paper from your little kitty, your fusible web, and he can be fused into place. The reason why we've waited until now is we actually need to situate him just over that seam line along the base, you can see there, so that he actually looks like he's sitting on the windowsill, and his little tail should just extend over that junction with that seam line there, just so that he looks like he's reaching up and perhaps chasing that little hanging button there. So fuse that one on with a hot iron and protective cloth. My little kitty is fused into place there. You can see that positioning, and now I will sew the same blanket applique stitch that I did around those window panels. I'm going to sew in black because we're keeping him as a nice clean silhouette, in black all the way around the outside of the kitty. So that is our little quilt front completed, and I have just cut my wadding to fit that quilt front and just inside that seam allowance there, so we've got room to stitch all the way around. I've also now cut to suit. I have cut my quilt back, and and it's just a matter of popping those together. Now if you're making this up as a little hanging quilt, as I am here, I'm going to be using a little quilt hanger for mine. So I'm just going to incorporate into that seam as we're going to sew this little one together. I'm actually just going to incorporate between those two layers just a little rolled ribbon there either side, and I will sew that one in as I go around. You can just add a little loop of ribbon either side, alternatively could just add a single loop in the center there, and then you can add a split ring and you can hang that one up just as I have with this one here on the diagonal. When they're a little square quilt like that, I just think it's nice to be able to use a little quilt hanger if you have one. Alternatively, you could just put two little loops and use a little piece of dowel, wooden dowel, to run through there as well. So there's a few ways you can do it. Of course, if you're making this up just as a little table topper, you don't need any of that at all. So I'll be popping those two in as I sew around. Now it's just a matter of pinning all the way around, and your seam allowance is the same, 1/2 centimetre. We need to leave the bottom open, a section open for turning, usually around about 7 centimetres just here. Leave that one open and that'll be enough to turn it through. So it's a little quilt sewn together. You see that seam all the way around, and I've just trimmed up those seams and actually just clipped off those corners there. Now we'll just turn it through and give it a press. So that's our little quilt front turned through and nicely pressed out there. I've also pressed under that little opening there. You can either slip stitch that opening closed by hand, or you can do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to sew a little top stitch just probably about 2 or 3 millimeters in all the way around that outside edge on the machine in a matching thread, and then you can quilt your little quilt as much as you like by hand or machine. I will probably leave it quite plain, and I will just stitch in right on that seam line all the way around through all of the layers, just to settle that little window in place there and keep my wool hanging nice and flat. So there we have our final stitching done all around the outside there, you can see, and I've stitched that one into place. You can see that settles that nicely, and I've tied it up onto my little quilt hanger, and that's just a beautiful little window wall hanging. Very, very sweet. Well, I hope you've enjoyed making this little mini quilt with me today. It's certainly one of my favourites. If you have enjoyed this video, you could give me a thumbs up. That would be beaut. Make sure that you subscribe, because if you do love making these little mini quilts, I've got a few designs there that you can choose from. Most of all, remember everyone to pay it forward, because everybody can. And until next time, it's hooroo from me.